Good morning, everyone. Welcome to House Judiciary. We'll call this meeting to order. Debbie, you call the roll.
Representative Chestick? Here. Representative Crago? Here. Representative Haroldson?
Here.
Representative Jennings? Representative Nemec?
Here.
Representative Oakley? Representative Provenza? Representative Rodriguez-Williams?
Here.
And Chairman Washut?
Here. So we have a quorum. Just what we always say in these meetings is we always want decorum. We have a list of rules for decorum. They're available outside by the agenda. Nothing too complicated. Just be nice to each other. Don't talk over the top of each other. No outbursts, no yelling, screaming, no name calling, and we'll get along just fine. All right. We do intend to take as much testimony as we possibly can, but like every day in a budget session, we are up against the clock. And so we have two bills to consider this morning and an hour and a half to get them done. So my plan is that we will first hear from the sponsor as he introduces his bill, followed by any legislators in the room who wish to testify, then state agencies that wish to testify, and then we'll open up to the general public. And with the general public, we will have 20 minutes of people speaking in favor, up to 20 minutes of people speaking in favor of the bill, not 20 minutes apiece, 20 minutes total of those speaking in favor of the bill, and then 20 minutes for those speaking in opposition to the bill. Again, not 20 minutes each, but 20 minutes total. So folks might want to give some thought about who has the most impactful testimony to give, and maybe make sure those folks get up early in that 20-minute process so we have an opportunity to hear from everyone in the room, okay? And then after the 20 minutes of opposition from the public, we will have the sponsor give a wrap-up, okay? So Representative Haroldson, you want to go to the, I'll move to House Bill 125. State your name for the record and then introduce your bill for us.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Chairman Washut, members of the Judiciary. Jeremy Haroldson, House District 4, bringing you guys House Bill 125, the Repealing Gun-Free Zones and Preemption Amendments. This is a bill that is not new to the Wyoming legislature, but has not really gotten traction to get into committee and find its way onto the floor. So wanting to see that become reality. Going through the bill is pretty simple. It's eliminating gun-free zones in the state of Wyoming that are government-ran, government-owned zones. And kind of one of the things that's really important to understand with this is all placed under our Concealed Carry Permit Act. So these are areas that you can carry with your concealed carry permit. And the reason we wanted to do it that way is it's a line of defense to make it where people have to go through that vetting process, to have a concealed carry permit, do the background check already to be able to carry in these areas. Some of those areas, if you go to page 2, starting in line 4, it says this section shall be known and may be cited as the Wyoming Repealing Gun-Free Act, and it goes through into section B, person lawfully carrying concealed weapons in Wyoming under that Wyoming statute 68104A, II through IV. That's that concealed carry permit statute section. They may conceal carry permits in the following places, or conceal weapons in the following places. Any meeting of a government entity, any meeting of the legislature or committee thereof, person lawfully carrying concealed carry in Wyoming under that statute also may conceal carry in the following places: public school, public college or university of professional athletics, event taking place on public property. And on line 3, it continues and says any public elementary or secondary school facility, any public college or university facility. Nothing in this action shall be construed to allow carrying of a concealed weapon where otherwise prohibited under 68104T. Prohibiting a private property owner from restricting firearms on his private property. That's very important to understand. We're not here to tell people how to run their life. If a business owner says we want a gun-free zone in our business, that is 100% their prerogative and should be their prerogative. That's not the government's place to tell them that. Also with that, and I got clarification on this, an entity, a private entity that is leasing government property, when they hold the lease, they hold the authority if they were to say this. So I'll use this as an example of for like one of our entities that is helping with at-risk youth or something like that. They may be in a government-owned building, but they hold the lease, hence they hold the authority. And that's important to understand. We're not trying to infringe upon non-for-profits or private entities' ability. Just in the same realm, currently in churches, you can legally conceal carry in a church and open carry in a church if you want, but that church also has the authority and ability to say that they don't want to have carrying in their church. And so those are kind of some of the questions that came forward. And then on line E, it says any person who prohibits entry to another person lawfully carrying a concealed weapon into a place authorized pursuant to B or C of this section, otherwise prohibited under section D of this section, when that person would otherwise be permitted entry, is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by imprisonment for not more than 1 year or a fine of $2,000. In that B, C, D, those areas that also talks about courtrooms would be off limits, as well as correctional facilities. We do not need people to be concealed carrying or carrying into one of our jails or into one of our correctional facilities. Obviously, there are already guards there that are armed. And then courtrooms, that's just an area we just don't want to. Obviously, we would love it if we could have a guard in every courtroom. That would be amazing. But what we don't want is someone who just found out that their life has drastically changed to be foolish. So that'll be another area that's prohibited. Moving on, and it just kind of goes through the rest of it, talking about the wearing or concealing weapons, penalties, exemptions, permits, and it's talking about what that actually would look like. And then I added into 11 through 13 on page 4, any elementary or secondary school facility, and then we struck out that 21.3.132 and then placed in there in which the person is rolled as a student. And I put that in there because I ran another bill this year that would align with the Supreme Court hearing that stated that 18 to 20-year-olds have the constitutional right to purchase a sidearm. And there's states now that are issuing concealed carry permits to 18-year-olds because of it. And so in the state of Wyoming currently, there is the option for a sheriff to make an exemption for an under 21-year-old to conceal carry. And so if this were to go into effect, I don't want a student to be able to conceal carry into their own school. That's in K through 12 facility. And I think that would just be a wisdom aspect that we don't want that to be something we open up. And then it just goes through and talks about just what you can and cannot do with taxation and ownership and all of that through to the end. And then just a couple things that I would ask or just kind of want to cover. Obviously, the U.S. Constitution, our Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 24 of the Wyoming Constitution gives every citizen in the state of Wyoming, unless they have forfeited that right through failure in some way, the right to not only own, possess, but to bear. And that word bear is very important. It's cited both in our Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution as well as the Wyoming Constitution. You have the right to bear arms, and bearing arms means you have the right to carry them, means you have the right to have them on your person for protection. And gun-free zones eliminate that right. I believe that there's we've got case law in 1995 where the Federal Gun-Free Zone Act was deemed unconstitutional when it stated that people could not conceal carry outside of schools. They did not actually sue for inside the school, so we do not have word from the Supreme Court on that I can find. But they did have it where they couldn't make someone in a gun-free school zone. Legally, they said you can't keep someone from concealed carrying a gun through that area. And then if we look at the numbers, Utah's 30 years with legislation just like this without an incident in any of their school systems. There's no notified or documented mass shootings in a school that had armed citizens in it or armed staff. Also, you look at, and the numbers are anywhere from 85 to 98. I found stats all the way from 85 to 98% of all mass shootings happen in gun-free zones. The truth of the matter is any shooting is absolutely horrendous, but when it's done in a place where people didn't have the right to defend themselves, it's I believe it's a travesty. We are creating soft zones by adding gun-free zones in. These are places where criminals who don't listen to signs or look at signs or care about signs have the ability to find unarmed citizens, good citizens that are actually defending or who are abiding by the law. They find them to be ready to exploit or to be able to kill. And so by eliminating this, what we do is we put good law-abiding citizens into a place where they can actually have that power. So with that, I would definitely stand for any questions on the bill.
Questions for Representative Harrelson? Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, excuse me, Representative Harrelson, are you aware of any peer-reviewed, scientifically valid studies that suggest that gun-free zones are more susceptible? You said that we're creating the soft target, but are there any peer-reviewed, professionally done studies that prove that? Because I looked and I couldn't find any.
Representative Harrelson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chestic. So when you say a peer review, what we look at is we look at statistics. And that's what we're going off of, is the statistics are very clearly stating that if you look at you look at all of your mainstream mass shootings we've had in the last decade, where are they at? They're at places that have been deemed to be gun-free zones. Now, there's always the exception of on the street in a parade or something like that. But facilities that are attacked by a shooter, those facilities, I know we could even say at a 9 out of 10 rate are gun-free zones. We see that statistic.
Follow up.
Yes. That's only half the process, though. There's a lot of gun-free zones that are attacked, but is the question I'm asking is, do you have any evidence that having armed people inside that gun-free zone makes it safer? And I have not found any studies that suggest that. I have found a study that said that gun-free zones are slightly less likely to have crime committed than other places. It was a weak correlation, but I haven't found any studies that say that having armed people inside of a gun-free zone makes it any safer.
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Chestic, it's not a gun-free zone when there's armed people.
Further questions? Representative Craigle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson. Just a quick, I guess, clarification. So if we go to page 2, you mentioned that essentially by the act of going to get your permit that you've been vetted and whatnot, which I totally agree with. But on page 2 under subsection B, you actually list constitutional carry subparagraph or Romanet 4 on lines 7, 8, and 9, and that does not require you to go apply for a permit. Am I correct in that?
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Chairman Washington and Representative Craigle. So for the governmental entity in the meeting of the legislature, you would not have to have a concealed carry permit for that, but anything in the school realm you would.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because we
Thank you.
didn't get to that in your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Representative Craigle.
Further questions? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify for you so that you know the copy that we have is missing, and for the board, or sorry, the committee, we're missing pages 2, 3. So we go from 1 to 4, 5, and 6. So was it just me and the vice chair?
I think you drew the short straw. Mine has all the pages.
It's my lucky day again.
Tony, you want to check mine?
I have an extra one. If somebody wants it.
Thank you.
See if it does, they can pass that.
Does everybody else have a complete copy of the bill? Nobody else has a short copy? Just you. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Further questions? I have a couple. Representative Harrelson, you mentioned that this type of legislation has come before and hasn't. Do you know how many times we've had bills like this that didn't make it through the process?
Chairman Washington, I don't know how many times. I know for sure it's been ran 4 times that I've seen, that I looked at, and it never actually, it usually either died in the drawer or didn't get brought into committee, or if it did get brought into committee, it got brought like last year into an appropriate committee where it was not really heard on the merit of what it was. It was more just, it was sent to die. So.
And you and I have talked a little bit about the difference in terms of concealed carry versus open carry.
Correct.
And that especially when we're talking about government entities, concealed carry seems to me to be related to personal defense, where open carry at a school board meeting or open carry at a city council meeting or open carry at the legislature seems to be more like intimidation. And the reason that we prohibit guns in the courtroom isn't just that we prohibit the defendant or the litigants from being armed, but we don't let anyone have a gun in the courtroom because we want justice, right? We want people to feel free to render the right decision if they're on the jury or the judge and so forth. So do you have some thoughts about how we could put language in this bill that would provide citizens with a concealed carry right without at the same time opening up those venues for open carry? Because this statute that we're amending here seems to speak only about concealed carry. And so just you have some ideas.
Thank you, Chairman Washit, and I'll probably have to maybe lean on our lawyer group a little bit on this one too to help. But when you, I mean, obviously this is addressing the concealed carry aspect. With that, would that open up open carry as well? I was told or under the impression it didn't, but I may be wrong on that. So I believe obviously under section C line 2 where it talks about the concealed carry permit, that is concealed carry only. And that would be everything from line 16 through page 3 in that. The only section would be under that page 2, line 7 through 14, talking about person lawfully carrying concealed weapons in Wyoming. So I think it states concealed. Under that may carry a concealed weapon in the following places. I already believe it's already taken care of in this bill.
Okay. Secondly, we have restrictions on alcohol serving institutions. I think you preserved that restriction in your bill. But I was thinking of a venue like War Memorial Stadium. And when I've gone down there for home games, there seems to be copious amounts of alcoholic beverages consumed in the stadium. And so I have I have a great deal of concern about people who are under the influence also being concealed carry. How would you address that if we open concealed carry on college campuses? Would that also include concealed carry in War Memorial Stadium or other venues that serve alcohol?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under current, how this is written, it would be the University of Wyoming campus. That would include the War Memorial as well as the AA. So that's definitely something we could have a conversation about.
And your restriction of students not carrying at school, but it sounds like that language in your bill talks about the student carrying where he's enrolled. So the high school student could go to the rival high school across town and would be permitted by that language? Was that your understanding?
Mr. Chairman, so at this point, they would be a concealed carry permit holder and they would have the right to carry into any area that permit would allow them the ability to. Under current law, that bill died, nothing's happening at this point, obviously. But if that were the case, they'd be considered an adult under Wyoming law at 18 years of age.
So with our reciprocity agreement, if someone moved to Wyoming who was 18 and had a concealed carry permit from another state, would that still be valid in Wyoming when they enrolled in our schools?
That would be correct, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Also, you were correct in restrictions on jails and prisons. I'm wondering about mental hospitals, secure wards and mental hospitals. Would you be amenable to exempting those from these provisions?
Chairman Washut, yes. I do believe that the Evanston Hospitals was categorized after talking with Director Shannon as a jail. So that would be covered under that institute. Now, obviously, a mental ward of a private hospital, again, that would be different because that would be under a different category with them having the ability to do that themselves.
And then one other that I got word on was state facilities with hazardous materials, flammable equipment. Might be a few research labs on the university campus where you have volatile substances that if a firearm were discharged in those environments, it might be highly problematic. Would you be amenable to exempting out research labs with volatile environments?
Mr. Chairman, sure, if that's a major concern, I mean, I guess, yeah. Obviously, sounds like if there were to be a threat in those environments, everyone's in trouble anyway. So I'm not quite sure what that all lines up to be in, but anyways,
Okay.
yeah, we can
Thank you.
definitely, if that's an
Further
issue.
questions for Representative Harrelson? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What about our military areas? So private citizens being able to conceal carry there?
Military bases?
Thank you, Chairman Washut and Representative Provenza. So in the situation of that's on a federal level. So we can't make laws on federal. I mean, at this point, you still couldn't legally carry into any federal building that is illegal currently. This doesn't affect that in any way.
What about state National Guard? Would that fall under military or
That's under-
federal, or
that's
is
still
that going to
under
be a
federal.
state property?
That's still under, I mean, that would not be affected by this from what they told me. Because I asked about military facilities, they said that would be completely covered under federal.
Okay. Further questions? Representative Craigle.
Just like, I guess, I'm just thinking in my mind, for example, we have the courtroom exemption right now.
Correct.
But I know there's a lot of old courthouses around the state where it's not really, carry's not happening in them. Courthouses that include other offices, for example, as we've done the courtroom security upgrades around the state, a lot of those buildings have security at the front door when you go to get in. Now, some of them don't. Some of the newer ones have the courthouse facility off in a different spot, and your treasurer, your assessor, et cetera, in a different building, which is fine. Carry's not an issue there, but how do we get around that little issue where the courthouse is, the courtrooms are in the same building as some
As
of
the courthouse.
as the old-timey courthouse? Thoughts on that?
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Chairman Washut, Representative Craigle. So as we talked about this, they made the statement it would apply to the courtroom. And the courtroom's corridor is what they stated. And I'm just going to only base it on what we know in our Platte County Courthouse, where the corridor actually has metal detectors in the corridor and then the rooms. Now, the rest of it, it's where I get my tags, it's where I pay my taxes, it's where you go to talk to the clerk and all those things. And so it would be a situation where it would apply to the corridor and the room is what this stated. Now, that'd be something if we need to talk more about, we can, but that's what they stated. Yep.
Thank you. Anything further want to add? Nothing? All right. Any legislators in the room wishing to testify? Any legislators wishing to testify? Seeing none, how about state agencies? Anybody from state agency, university, community colleges? Dr. Johansson? No, we don't time these. Just welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Stephen Johansson with the Department of Health. Just to address some of the questions that came up earlier about state facilities. So Department of Health does oversee the psychiatric hospital in Evanston, which does have a forensic criminal component to it, presumably exempted under Title VI in this bill. The other side of the state hospital is civil, Title 25 civil commitments, not criminal. So there's a little uncertainty on whether that exemption would apply. I think the intent would be that it does. Leaves open some other questions about the other state facilities like the Life Resource Center, which has high behavioral populations. Our nursing home in Basin has psychiatric and psychological patients as well. We do have policies to prevent firearms coming into those facilities. Again, the way I read the intent and hear the discussion is, there's really not the intent to go in that direction in a place of a governmental meeting. On page 4, lines 23 going into page 5, that's where, again, more of a question from the department than a suggestion. This really says, except as authorized by Title 15 and Title 23, no state agency or entity can essentially regulate the concealed carry of firearms. That's where my question comes. If that applies to state agencies, can a state agency like the Department of Health provide rules or policy at the civil side of the state hospital, at the Life Resource Center, at the Retirement Center in Basin, at the Veterans Home, at the Pioneer Home, where we do have patients really struggling and sometimes in a severe way with behavioral health issues. I think it opens up some other questions outside of Department of Health with child care facilities, for example. So not to irritate the committee with a laundry list of suggested exemptions, just really wanted to raise a question on the intent here, which again, I didn't read into the bill, but maybe an unintended consequence that would prevent an agency in a health and human service setting, for example, Department of Health, Department of Family Services, from providing those reasonable restrictions given the populations that are served or the life safety issues that could arise from that. Again, when we review the bill and see a meeting of a governmental entity, I think the reasonable intent there is, public meetings, things of that nature. Department of Health does host public meetings of various committees in our facilities sometimes. I think, again, don't see the intent being to allow, weapons in the state hospital where we have, committed patients, but really more of a question to the committee and certainly stand ready to work with the sponsor or the legislature on any improved language if the concern is shared. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So I'm not familiar with your facility. So the building where you would have community mental health meetings and so forth, public meetings of some sort, is it separate and distinct from the patient buildings?
Mr. Chairman, yes and no. It really depends. For example, the state hospital is one campus, but we do have obviously doors and breezeways before you go onto patient units. It's a locked facility, so conference rooms and things like that are separate. But for example, with visitors that come either to visit patients or to do any other business where we maybe tour the facility, those types of things, we do have rules and restrictions on what you can and can't carry into the facility, and that applies obviously at the state hospital, which is our highest restricted level of care. But certainly with the new mission the legislature gave the department for the Life Resource Center, a lot of those populations are now shared and used as kind of sister facilities where we do have significantly behaviorally challenged patients at almost all of the Department of Health facilities. So I think the concern is there on my part, but didn't want to suggest here that I was reading the intent of the legislation to do that, just maybe an unintended consequence with the language.
Representative Harrelson, you want to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johansson, so as we look at that, being there is that civil side to the hospital, the term like secure, what would you describe your facilities as? Do we have a name?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, so at the state hospital, it would be a psychiatric hospital.
Okay.
That's the level of care of that facility, both on the forensic and the civil side. At the Life Resource Center in Lander, that is an intermediate care facility as well as a nursing facility. Its populations served there are folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities, as well as what the legislature defined as hard to place populations, extreme and significant behaviors, dual diagnosis, comorbidities, things like that. The nursing home, the Wyoming Retirement Center in Basin, is a nursing facility, skilled nursing facility. And it runs the gamut of populations there, long-term care as well as memory care, dementia care, and 2 locked units there for memory care and behavioral populations. Then, not to belabor the point, our 4th and 5th facilities are the Pioneer Home, which is an assisted living facility in Thermopolis, and the Veterans Home, which has both assisted living level of care in Buffalo and skilled nursing care in Buffalo.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sounds good. So I'm looking for an umbrella that we could catch these under. So like state-ran medical facilities, would that cover them? Or what, do we have a term that we can use? Because at the end of the day, that was a question we asked, and they said, yeah, Evanston, because I said that, obviously, we don't want it to be a deal where we have an open or a concealed carry option into the hospital in Evanston or something of that nature. But is there a way we could umbrella and cover this?
Dr. Johansson?
Mr. Chairman, Director, certainly not a doctor. Don't want you to give me an undue promotion here. Representative Haroldson, off the top of my head, and again, I know maybe corrections was consulted. We were not. The potentially state-run health and human services settings, again, just thinking off the top of my head, but we'd be happy to maybe work with you offline and suggest some umbrella language.
I'll do that.
Thank you very much. Further questions for Director Johansson? All right, thank you very much. Other state agencies? Welcome, Director Schmidt. You want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Corin Schmidt. I'm the Director of the Department of Family Services. And because Director Johansson kind of mentioned some of the Department of Health healthcare facilities, I also think had some questions just really about the legislature regulating firearms and removing that from the state agencies. I just wanted the committee to be aware that we do license foster care homes. We license child care centers, both home-based centers and child care centers, and also group homes, residential treatment centers, and the BOCES, the Board of Cooperative Education. And in those levels of care, for those that are home-based, like foster care, like family foster care, or child care settings, what we ask through our regulation is that they have a policy to keep firearms safe, because we recognize that those are people's homes, and so that they have some way of just ensuring that there's no access by the children that are there. In terms of the campus type settings, so we're talking group homes, residential treatment centers, and residential BOCES, we currently under regulation do not allow firearms. Those are places where children are going, adolescents are going because of behavioral health needs sometimes, certainly because of some mental health issues. So as you think about the role of the legislature in making some of those decisions, just recognizing that that's part of what we do in our regulation.
Director, facilities like the girls' school and boys' school, are they considered prisons or jails, or do you have another title for those types of facilities?
Mr. Chairman, I need to look into that. I've always considered them correctional for some reasons, but I'm going to have to double check the statute specifically. Currently, we just live under the auspices of the executive order of, not having firearms through rule and regulation. So it would, with the removal of any of the agencies or the state being able to make that determination, I need to see if we fall under the correctional definition. And then I will let you know.
Thank you. Further questions for Director Schmidt? Thank you for being here this morning. Other state agencies in the room? Seeing none. Now it's time for the public. That's again, we'll have 20 minutes of those speaking in favor of the bill, and then 20 minutes for those opposed to the bill. So first we'll start with those in favor of the bill. Vice Chairman will run the clock. Good morning. Make sure you have a green light on your microphone. Introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to
Good
do.
morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Joe Michaels from Guernsey. I'm a member of the Town Council in Guernsey. I spent my entire adult life in the Armed Forces of the United States, short period of time as a deputy sheriff. I have been permitted to carry concealed since the late 60s when I joined the United States Air Force. I spoke with a member of Platte County 1 about this bill that's out here, and he was very much in favor of it because it gave them, as a school board, some options that they could, with a concealed carry permit holder, if one of the teachers wished to carry in the school, and some additional training and perhaps a psychological evaluation that they would be able to allow this person to carry inside the school, not to possess it in a locked room or something like that, because you can lose control of them. Platte County 2 is elected to go, and they're paying for a school resource officer, and that's how they have armed officer inside the school. I also drive a school bus for activities, and there's a lot of open prairie between Guernsey and Farson, this, that, and the other thing. As a current law is, I cannot carry on the bus. It's a gun-free zone. So should something happen out there, I have no ability to do anything other than surrender the bus or run over somebody if I have to. My resources are limited. To answer one of the questions about the military and the F.E. Warren Air Force Base, even though I am permitted in 2 states, obviously Wyoming, I also have a non-resident permit for Utah. I have that because Utah requires me to demonstrate my proficiency with a weapon. Wyoming does not, so my reciprocity is a little bit broader than Wyoming's. As such, and as a retiree, I cannot possess a weapon on F.E. Warren Air Force Base. So that should answer your question. Any questions of me, sir?
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones. Please introduce yourself, make sure you have a green light, and then tell us what you want us to hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Mark Jones. I'm a national director with Gun Owners of America. And we represent almost 3 million Americans in regards to their Second Amendment rights. I live in Johnson County, Wyoming, and our organization represents many thousands of people in Wyoming. We fully support House Bill 125 to repeal gun-free zones. We want to make it clear to our members that the concealed carry permit is required on school grounds to get around the Federal Gun-Free Zones Act. And that's an excellent addition to the bill. Representative Harrison fully understands that. This is basically an issue of basic Second Amendment rights. Gun-free zones are simple invitations to criminals and mass killers. To answer one of the questions that was asked previously by one of the members of the committee, according to crime statistics available from the federal government, 94% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. The simple reason is that killers don't like law-abiding people shooting back. According to Obama's CDC, and Obama was no friend of the Second Amendment, guns are used between 16 and 100 times more often to save lives or stop crime than to kill people. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, 86% of police in America believe that armed civilians can stop or reduce the severity of mass shootings. These are all statistics available from our own federal government. And I know this is an emotional issue. I know that many people are scared of guns and they believe that this will create problems. But the statistics simply don't back that up. 7 states allow some form of concealed carry on school grounds. Utah is the state that everyone points to because they've done it for about 30 years without incidents. And think about it like this. We have a lot of members that have children in schools. They go to plays, they go to events. These are law-abiding citizens who have been vetted, who carry concealed every day. They have a daughter in a play, and they sit there in the room completely disarmed. And if a madman comes in that room, who's there to stop that killer? We have a lot of people here in Wyoming, law-abiding people, don't want to have to leave their gun in their car. They want to be able to protect the children. And a madman does not listen to gun-free zone rules, regulations, or obey the signs anyway. Regarding government buildings, many states allow what Representative Harrelson is trying to allow here today. Neighboring states of Utah, Montana, and Idaho come to mind, where you can carry in the Capitol. Second Amendment advocates like me carry in those capitals all the time. 81% of police officers in America agree that teachers should be armed. 86% of police say armed civilians can stop or reduce the severity of mass shootings. 81% believe teachers should be armed if they want to be. Nobody's telling them they have to be. This would be voluntary. Nobody's going to make anyone carry a weapon that doesn't want to. So it's time for the cowboy state to stand up and do what a lot of other states have done. A lot of our neighbors, even states like New Hampshire, allow this and have actually since the creation of the state, believe it or not. So I encourage you to pass the bill with no weakening amendments. Certainly understand the need to address mental facilities and jails and things like that. But we certainly would encourage you not to weaken this bill from the perspective of law-abiding people, law-abiding concealed carry holders, and their ability to protect themselves and their families in these settings. And I'll say one final thing. I think you legislators would be more protected in this building if people like me could carry a concealed weapon. If a madman comes into this facility today, there's very little to stop carnage. And there are a lot of very competent people in this building, like myself, who are trained, highly trained, and can help protect you. So I think you should think about that as well. So with that, I appreciate your time, committee. Appreciate you, Chairman. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions? Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, excuse me, got something going on my throat here. You cited some statistics about how many shootings happen in gun-free zones, but of course, the correlations do not result in causation. There's a difference between correlation and causation. You said that killers don't like people shooting back, but you also said that madmen do not respect the gun-free zone. A madman also doesn't really care if there's an armed person inside the gun. Having people with guns inside the gun-free zone is not going to deter the madman because, by definition, they're mad. They are not rational people. Deterrence requires a rational choice. Oh, do I go there because do I stay away from that place because there's a gun or not? But they're not rational. Most these madmen who go in and commit mass shootings understand that when they go in and do that, they are likely to die. They are going to get shot back at. They know that. And whether it's a good guy with a gun, a concealed carry, or a police officer who shows up later, they're going to get shot at and they're probably going to die. They know that when they start these rampages. So I don't see how this creates more safety because the madman's going to do it anyway. But it does create a risk of accidental or other kinds of shootings. So it creates, to me, this creates more risk than anything it might save. What is your response?
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chestic, the famous case of the Colorado theater shooter a few years ago, that gentleman, according to police, passed 7 theaters that did not restrict concealed carry and went to a theater that did restrict concealed carry, and I don't remember how many people he killed before police stopped him, but he killed quite a few. There are 16 states that allow some form of armed people in schools, and again, it's not always all schools. A lot of times the schools get to choose. There has never been a mass shooting in a school with armed teachers and staff. In fact, and there has never been a lethal accidental discharge of a weapon. There was one in a parking lot that went into the pavement in one school. So the statistics would kind of disagree with your point, sir. These actions do deter criminals, and the stats are out there. John Lott with the Crime Prevention Research Council has studied this extensively for 30 or 40 years. He's on television all the time. There's some other professors around the country that have studied these issues. And again, we pull data from the FBI and the CDC, which under recent presidential administrations have not been terribly friendly. And all the data supports the fact that gun-free zones are targets and that killers generally avoid them. Their goal is to make attention, get into the media, and they don't usually last very long when armed, law-abiding armed people are there. They're not able to have the level of carnage that they want to be famous.
All right, thank you. Let's get some other witnesses up. I want to make sure we have opportunity for others as well. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, committee. Thank you,
Other
Chairman.
people in favor of House Bill 125? Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to say that there was very little to stop carnage. I want to thank the law enforcement and the highway patrol that is here every single day. I think they do an incredible job. So there is very powerful force between the carnage. So I'd just like to applaud our law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. I'm Erin Taylor. I represent the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. And Mr. Chairman, we're not here for or against the bill, so I thought I'd just get up here.
Okay.
The message that the association representing the 56 trustees at all 8 community colleges is such that they would like to retain that local control to make the decision for their campus, what's best for their community, for their campus community. Much like we don't like the feds telling the state what to do, that's kind of the feeling that the trustees have. Some campuses would probably consider allowing in that respect, and others might not. And then we just consider the resources that are needed in that instance. So that's the message from the trustees is just allow them that local decision making. Otherwise, if that's not the case, we definitely appreciate the conversation about the particular places, and community college campuses do have some special places that might need some special attention. It just so happens that I have Dr. Jeffrey Hawes here, who is from Eastern Wyoming College, and he would like to speak to that if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
This is the time for the bill, so I don't want to use up minutes. I paused the clock over here. I don't want to use up minutes if you're not going to be supportive of the bill. You can speak at the next section when we're talking about opposition to the bill. So if you're neutral on the bill, I'll let you speak. But otherwise, if you're going to be contrary to the bill, you need to be in the second half. Doctor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee. Ultimately, just personally, I'm a huge proponent of the Second Amendment. Reality is it shouldn't even have to be a proponent. The reality is it's the law. Gun-free zones, though, are obviously something that's been a carve-out, putting special places under evaluation. So, Mr. Chairman, at the end of the day, neutral. Personally, I have my very strong viewpoint that I hear the things that were being stated by the prior two individuals, and those are things that strike an accord with me because safety is a top priority. We had our chief of police here in Torrington just recently address our board of trustees, and just looking at how we best respond if an issue shows up on our campus. And the reality is there is a response time for law enforcement to show up, and in that 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes that it takes for law enforcement to show up, a lot of a lot of bad things occur. We've watched that happen on campuses, whether it's a high school, college, or university across this country. The one thing that I want to put a pause when we think about the idea of local control, community colleges, one thing that's very unique is each one can take on very unique things and characteristics about their local communities. Whether it's the education we offer, the types of activities and opportunities that we present to our community. When we start thinking even uniquely, Eastern Wyoming College specifically has a gunsmithing program. That creates a set of unique circumstances that we've envisioned a day that maybe dorms go up on the Douglas campus. When that happens, how do we actually help students do some of the things about safety, protecting that secure weapon so someone who is untrained and unskilled understands, can't get access. There's all these types of questions that are out there. And when I think about the local control, that's the real question, just making sure that we have the ability to protect our students, our employees in a manner that makes sure that we're doing the right things that require some of that local responsiveness.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. We just didn't know where we fit in on that. So just unique circumstances. So
That
I
happens
appreciate the
sometimes,
time.
Either arena. Thank you very much for your testimony. Anyone else in favor of the bill?
Good morning, Chairman Washington and members of the committee. My name is Steve Milia from Cheyenne, right here in Cheyenne. And I stand in support of Representative Harrelson's bill. I do have the same concerns as Mothers Demand Action and others that shootings need to stop. There needs to be some restrictions as far as how do we stop these mass shooters and whatnot. I agree with the first two speakers in that the research that I've done parallels what they have said, and criminals obviously don't obey the law. So they say a gun-free zone. What they want to do, and the research I've said that there's a journalist that talked to these shooters, and they said, we're not afraid of the police because it's going to take them a few minutes to get there, whether it's a minute and a half or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and they get there and they got to organize what they're doing. They can do a lot of carnage, as the last speaker just mentioned, in a minute and a half, 2 minutes, et cetera. They can do a lot of damage. And they said, we want to do the most damage in the least amount of time with the least amount of resistance. So if we know there's no resistance there, that's where we want to go. And a couple of other things is that one of the speakers said that 94% of the mass shootings that do occur in gun-free zones. And if we have good security, like teachers and whatnot that have the evaluations and the training and whatnot, that's going to deter some of the shooters. Probably not all of them, but a lot of them, they do want their 15 minutes of fame, and in 15 minutes of fame, they can do a lot of damage. So gun-free zones really say, civilians, you can't carry guns, but criminals, well, you're not gonna obey those things. A shooter is gonna come up and say, oh, here's a gun-free zone. Gosh, I can't bring my gun in here, so I'm gonna go back and get my baseball bat or whatever else, and I'm gonna go in there. They don't obey the law. That's why the criminals. So certain restrictions, certain securities, et cetera, would be good. If everybody in this room right now is armed, if all of you are armed and I was a mass shooter, I'd say, okay, the whole committee is armed. I mean, I'm not going to get very far. All right, so I think concealed carry is good because if you have open carry, then a shooter would say, okay, those are my first targets. And as you had mentioned also, Chairman Washington, that open carry could be a little bit of intimidation to those people that don't really like guns. And I can understand that. When I see someone open carry, I always go over and say, thank you for carrying. Because in my mind, somebody's going to see that and they're going to say, well, maybe I won't go in that direction, or that might be their first target, but that person can shoot back. And the research that I've done parallels with the previous speaker have said that shooters don't like being shot at. They want to shoot other people. And if they don't have if they have resistance, then they're going to say, maybe I'm going to think about this something else. So I stand in support of this bill. I think, appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Others wishing to testify in favor of House Bill 125? Anyone else wishing to testify in favor of House Bill 125? Do we have anyone on Zoom wishing to bring whoever, if they're in favor, bring them in, please? The name? Nephi Cole. Mr. Cole, are you out there? There he is. Can you hear me?
I am. I can, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I assume you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Nephi Cole, Nephicole, and I apologize I'm not being able to be with you today. I'm traveling to a meeting on the East Coast. I wanted to just express a few points and facts, some commentary on behalf of the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We're the Firearms Trade Association of America, and we represent the manufacturers, retailers, and distributors of firearms in the United States of America. So we do work in multiple states and in multiple capitals, and I just wanted to share with you, as we look at capital carry, currently capital carry just in the region that I work, I can carry a concealed firearm into the capitals in Idaho, into Montana, Utah, and Minnesota. And so the Supreme Court does allow for the prohibition of firearms in sensitive spaces, and that was a decision, that was a discussion in the Bruin decision. The thing that we would like to share with you is that defining something as a sensitive space with nothing but a sign is a trend that we're seeing nationally, and we feel like it is problematic. If something is sensitive, and if you are prohibiting people from carrying firearms in a sensitive space, it stands to reason that that space should be prohibited, that space should be protected by something better than just signage. And so as you think about where you allow concealed carry lawfully, we'd ask that you consider this. If the only thing stopping an individual who would be unlawfully carrying a firearm is a sign, then perhaps it's a good idea to consider allowing the lawful carry of a concealed firearms to an individual who's going to obey that sign, who's going to leave a firearm outside. Because again, if that's the only way that you're defining a sensitive space is with a sign, perhaps there's a different approach that should be considered. We thank you for considering these challenging issues. We know that they're tough. At their most simplistic, we think we can break it down by looking at people who obey the law and people who don't. A reminder, in Wyoming, it's actually legal to open carry into most places. It's legal to open carry into public buildings in the state of Wyoming. It's legal to open carry into government meetings in the state of Wyoming. The only prohibition in Wyoming is to the lawful concealed carry. And that may seem somewhat backwards. We think that it's worth you taking a look at that and asking whether that was the actual intent. The other thing I would bring up is when you're talking about state buildings and state employees, remember that the prohibition on state employees being able to lawfully carry in their buildings only applies to state employees. As a private individual, I can go into most state buildings in the state of Wyoming that aren't federal buildings, but state buildings. I can lawfully carry a concealed weapon to most of those buildings. That prohibition by executive order only applies to people who work for the state of Wyoming. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Pause the clock. Representative Crago, do you have a question for Mr. Cole?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cole, just one quick question regarding the laws of surrounding states you mentioned, and I think Mr. Jones talked about it too earlier. When you carry concealed into other capitals in some of our neighboring states, and I know you travel all over the country, when you do that, do you have to have a permit to carry a valid permit, or can you, and I had this discussion with Representative Haroldson, can you do it under the constitutional carry provision of our statute or something similar in those states? If you're picking up what I'm asking.
Mr. Cole?
I am, yes, and I apologize. I have not looked at that. I have a concealed carry permit from the state of Wyoming. That's valid in all those states for me to carry. I know in some states that has come up as a concern and an issue, and I would like to remind the committee, in looking at this proposed legislation and looking at the law in Wyoming, there are a series of bullets, they're small numerals, and if you chose to go that direction, it actually is, you can easily differentiate in Wyoming's law between those who are carrying constitutional carry and those who still have a permit. And I don't recall the number of the letter, the bullet point under the law. But if you chose to go that route, I think that certainly is viable and available to you.
Thank you very much. We have time for maybe one more quick witness in favor of House Bill 125. House Bill 125 in favor. Anyone else on Zoom? All right, we will close public comment in favor. We'll go to public comment opposed. And again, we have 20 minutes. So keep your comments specific to this bill and make your point quickly, if I might add. Very good. Please introduce yourselves and tell us what you want us to hear.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Erica Cole. I'm a resident of Cheyenne, Wyoming, House District 41. I am a professional engineer. I'm a public servant, but above all, I'm a mother. I stand here today in opposition of House Bill 125. I am testifying as a volunteer for Wyoming Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I feel it's also important that you know I'm a gun owner myself. I do own 2 firearms, and I think there's a time and a place for guns, but I don't think guns everywhere is the answer. I'm concerned about many different parts of this bill. I am concerned about it allowing more guns into sensitive places like schools, universities, sporting events where people are drinking copious amounts of alcohol, government meeting spaces. I am concerned that removing the gun-free zones will then allow open carry into all of these spaces as well, which is concerning. Increasing the number of guns in spaces like these does not make us safer. It just creates a lot more potential for dangerous scenarios. I am concerned that the provisions listed on page 2, line 16 and 17, that a person may concealed carry into a school subject to having a concealed carry permit will not be enforced in a constitutional carry state. I feel that school administrators will be fearful to challenge individuals and check for concealed carry permits because this legislation is making it possible for them to be found guilty of a misdemeanor and punishable by up to 1 year in prison or a $2,000 fine. I am also concerned that this bill is trying to override the power of local officials to decide who can carry a firearm in schools. Currently, the school boards have the ability to make the determination about whether school employees can carry guns on their grounds or not. We heard 2 testimonies today from individuals in favor of this bill, and both of them mentioned that if teachers were to concealed carry, they cited evaluations and trainings that should be done. But if you reference page 5 of this bill, starting on line 1, which the health department also pointed out, no state agency or entity, city, town, council, county, political subdivision, or any other entity shall authorize, regulate, or prohibit the sale, transfer, purchase, delivery, taxation, manufacture, ownership, storage, use, carrying, possession of a firearm, weapon, or accessory. So this bill is limiting the school district to have any ability to enforce any training regulations, any mental health evaluations, and that's highly concerning, getting rid of that local control. I trust my child's school board to know what is needed to keep my daughter and her classmates safe. This blanket legislation takes that authority away from the school district and instead gives it to a body of people who are not intimate with the dynamics of each school district. Lastly, I have concerns about how this bill will permit guns into government meeting spaces at a time where there is a risk for political tensions, and tensions are high. I think we should empower local officials to protect public safety and keep guns out of spaces where essential government functions are taking place. We should all be able to attend a government meeting, and our children should be able to go to school without worrying about who is carrying a weapon. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Seeing none, thank you. Jared?
Thank you, Chair Washut and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am Beth Howard, a longtime resident of Cheyenne, a mother and a grandmother, and I am here to voice my opposition to House Bill 125 and my concern for the safety of Wyoming citizens. I am testifying today as a volunteer with Wyoming Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Chair Washut, you did ask how many times this legislation had come forward. I have been a volunteer since 2018, and I think almost every year this bill has come up. I haven't checked that, but it's a lot. If more guns in more places would keep us safer, Wyoming would already be the safest state, but we are not. In fact, we have the 3rd highest rate of gun deaths and the 2nd highest rate of gun suicide. House Bill 125 is based on a false premise, the myth that mass shooters are more likely to target gun-free zones. This is not true. The overwhelming majority of fatal mass shootings in the United States occur in locations where guns are allowed, such as private homes or public locations. The fact is that most mass shootings occur in areas where guns are permitted. Of the 156 mass shootings that occurred from 2009 to 2016, only 10% occurred in gun-free zones. Most of these shootings, 63%, occurred in private homes. Other incidents of mass shootings in spaces where guns are permitted include public streets, parks, supermarkets, shopping centers, restaurant and commercial districts, parades, and outdoor festivals. 8 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings occurred in locations that either allowed firearms or had armed guards present. Only 2 occurred where firearms were prohibited. Laws and policies that force K-12 schools and colleges to allow guns on campus are likely to lead to more shootings, homicides, and suicides, but are unlikely to prevent mass shootings. Firearms are now the leading cause of death for children in the United States, and this is a devastating fact. We can do better. Guns do not belong in sensitive areas, such as schools and government buildings. There are many ways to protect citizens from violence, but this is not one of them. There are gun rights and gun wrongs, and this bill is all wrong. I urge you to vote no on House Bill 125. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. Seeing none. Other witnesses in favor? You both did a great job testifying. I could tell you were a little nervous, but you did just fine. Others wishing to testify before the committee? In opposition to House Bill 125? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bruce Berkland. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Youth Service Association. So we have crisis shelters, group homes, prevention programs, do family therapy, treatment with youth and families. I appreciate Representative Harrelson's clarification about whether private property or not. I would say two things. One is clarify, there's a great deal of talk about the man shooting, and I understand those people are not necessarily, just because they have a sign up, that's going to stop them. What we're worried about is the impulse. The majority of suicides anyway are by impulse, and I also think in terms of what we're worried about, we're working in a lot of family conflict, family situations where families are torn apart. You're having tough conversations. People get upset and certainly get hurt and frightened, and this is not a very safe environment for somebody on impulse who has a concealed weapon. I think those people would abide by the rule of having the rule of you're not to carry guns in this area, and I think that provides extra safety. I think one of the ways that could be addressed would be, in some of our facilities, we have a wide range of clearly private nonprofits, but there's also some that are mixed that's hard to clarify, and some that are actually part of a government entity. And I think one of the ways that could be addressed is if the departments could still regulate, that would regulate all of us, and they would set those rules that would be consistent rather than trying to build into this bill like exactly which places could or could not be continue or accepted. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick. Why don't you talk to me afterwards, and let's see if we can figure out a way to protect those areas that you guys are concerned about.
Okay.
Can we do that? Thank you.
Thank you. Further witnesses in opposition to House Bill 125? Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And first of all, I don't feel like our association is in support or in opposition to this, but because I do have some suggested language and some concerns with enforcement from a law enforcement perspective, I figured this would be the time for us to come up. Mr. Chairman, the first thing, if we would go to page 3, the bottom half of that page, starting at line 14, we have the criminal component of anyone trying to enforce this ban makes it a misdemeanor in Wyoming. And that first couple of lines says, any person who prohibits entry to another person lawfully carrying a concealed weapon into a place, and so on. If I may suggest, if we look at this from a couple of different perspectives, somebody that is removed from a government building for some other action, I think of a basketball game and somebody is disruptive in the basketball game and a school authority asks them to leave and they whip out their concealed carry permit. I don't think that person has the authority to make them leave. So by looking at line 14, the very end of that line, if you add the word for, so it would read any person who prohibits entry to another person for lawfully carrying a concealed weapon. And secondarily, law enforcement would be put in a position to determine not only does that person have standing to remove them, but what is the reason why they're asking them to remove. So from a law enforcement perspective, avoiding criminal charges against a police officer for removing somebody from a facility when asked to by somebody that has the authority to do that, I would ask that you consider to add the word knowingly. A law enforcement officer would be, when he knows that it's for that reason, it would be easy for him to avoid getting down that criminal path. So if you look at line 14, any person who knowingly prohibits entry to another person for lawfully carrying a concealed weapon, and so on. And Mr. Chairman, yes, go ahead.
Just real quickly, you said for lawfully carrying, and that word for is not in this bill.
I don't
It
see
says,
that word in there, Mr.
anyone who
Chairman.
prohibits entry to another person lawfully carrying. They're not prohibiting them from entering for carrying the weapon if they just deny them for entry, right? Is that how you read that? Or am I wrong there? That's not the first time. We'll talk about it after. Continue with your statement, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, I have 3 other points that I'd like to get to quickly, unless there's any questions on that. Mr. Chairman, page 4, where it talks about, it starts on line 11, but it's carving out that enrolled student who possesses a permit and would carry in a elementary or secondary school. I would ask the committee to consider that situational conflict oftentimes happens in rival sporting events and rival competitions, and having that person by this bill here, say an 18-year-old senior in high school that has a permit would be prohibited from carrying in his own school, but it doesn't prohibit him from carrying in a rival school at a basketball game the next night. And I don't know that necessarily matters, but it is something worth consideration. And Mr. Chairman, if I could move on to some of the discussion that we had earlier today, there was discussion about secured facilities. And, what's the difference between a state hospital and a prison and a school and so forth. And also the question of where the Wyoming Girls School and the Wyoming Boys School fits into this, because if, by definition, they are a secondary school in Wyoming. However, I'd like to point the committee's attention to Wyoming State Statute 65209. That is 65209. Which makes it a felony to carry or bring in a firearm to a jail, prison, and specifically the Wyoming Boys School, the Wyoming Girls School, and a state hospital. Okay, just to answer questions that we had this morning, I think that the Wyoming Boys School and Girls School and any jail or prison, private or public in Wyoming, can still prohibit firearms because those are actually secured facilities. And the risk there is not so much that somebody have a gun in there, it's being overpowered and then someone else taking that gun from them. That's why they're very secure facilities. And then, Mr. Chairman, the last thing that this bill removes the existing statute for school districts to go through a process to arm teachers. That's existing law in Wyoming. And the first sentence in that law, 21.3.132, specifically has the phrase "in consultation with local law enforcement." And I do believe that our law enforcement agencies across the state of Wyoming are small enough and our communities are small enough that our law enforcement is in robust communication with those school professionals. And a lot of times we have school resource officers in many of our schools. And that taking away that "in consultation with local law enforcement" puts a risk out there that we could have people carrying in a school that are maybe employees of the school that are concealed carrying. And when we have a dangerous situation, that brings into question friendly fire, what we call blue on blue shootings. In law enforcement, we're always conscious of that, making sure that we're not shooting friendly. And by the time law enforcement shows up to a scene, law-abiding citizens, employees of the school district, they might have the upper hand, and it doesn't appear that way from law enforcement. And I know this is a training component, it is something that we would have to change in our training across the state, but it is something to consider that we would hope that any entity that does have more robust concealed carry has some sort of communication with local law enforcement to help diminish that possibility of friendly fire.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Anyone else wishing to testify against House Bill 125? Anybody on Zoom? With that, I'm going to close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the bill by Nemec, second by Oakley. Discussion and amendments. So let's start on page 1. Any amendments on page 1? See any? Page 2. Any amendments on page 2? Any amendments on page 2? Page 3. Any amendments on page 3? Representative Crago.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, back to page 2.
Very good.
That bottom paragraph, lines 20 through 22, and I think this would address some of the concerns. So I think we could craft that paragraph to say any public school, public college, or university, and then strike the word professional, or athletic event taking place on public property which does not serve alcoholic beverages.
Okay, everybody heard that? Debbie, did you get that?
Can we have discussion in case we?
Discussion on the amendment.
Second.
There is second, is Oakley. So we have the proposal to strike professional and disallow those locations to sell alcohol. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wondering if we could maybe a little bit of a friendly, instead of serve, do sell alcohol. Because that would then strike the guy that slipped the flask in his boot or party, I mean, just sell, if that would be amenable.
So now we're back to sell alcohol. Is that friendly? Okay. Discussion on prohibiting selling alcohol at sporting events and striking the professional. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion has carried. Debbie, you got that? Okay. Now, page 3, or any further on page 2? Page 3. Representative Oakley.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make the 2 amendments suggested by law enforcement. So it would be adding knowingly on line 14 between who and prohibits, and then adding the word for at the end of line 14.
Second. So we have a motion by Oakley, second by Haroldson. For Nemec, excuse me. And that's it. Add the word knowingly after the word who and for after the word person on line 14, page 3. You have that? Very good. Any question on the amendment? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that amendment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That amendment carries. Further amendments. Page 4. Representative Chestik.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment which I'll pass down. I'll read it out loud. It's on page 4, line.
Will you make sure Secretary gets a copy, please?
Yeah. Line 11, change that line to read, any elementary school, comma, secondary school, comma, and adding the words public college or university. And the purpose of this is, I'm concerned about dorms particularly, but not just dorms, classrooms as well. Especially in dorms where there are young people who are still in the process of maturing. There may be alcohol involved. I don't want to have guns. I don't want to put more guns in the dorms or even in the classrooms. It creates more danger. Just putting more guns into a public space creates more danger, and the risk of accidental discharge or somebody else in the room, I don't know who my roommate is, but I find he's got a gun. I could take the gun and use it for some other purpose. Just putting more guns on campus is a dangerous thing, and that's the purpose for my amendment.
Discussion on the amendment? Do you have a second? Second by Provenza. Discussion? Question being called. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. That amendment has failed. Further amendments? Representative Cragel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just back on page 3, I just was thinking of cover a few of these situations that Mr. Thompson brought up, and I think where it's under section D, we can put it on line 13. We can create a subparagraph 3, and it could say, I'll read part D. Nothing in this section shall be construed to, and then we can say allow the concealed carry of firearms into areas otherwise prohibited by law. And that would include the Boys and Girls School. That would include DFS facilities that we've already got covered, hopefully. And if not, we can work on some language, but I think that'd at least be a marker to put in the bill where we can work on that.
Is there a second? Second by Harrelson.
Mr. Chairman, and we'll work on that. We got the marker, and if we pass this, we'll get the marker, but we'll make sure you guys are covered.
Discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of that amendment? Do you have it, Debbie? Did you get the language? All those in favor of the amendment on line 13, page 3, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That amendment carries. Further amendments? Question on the bill. Debbie, call the roll. I'll get to your bill.
Representative Chestic?
No.
Representative Cragel?
Aye.
Representative Harrelson?
Aye.
Representative Jennings? Representative Nemec?
Aye.
Representative Oakley? Representative Provenza?
No.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams?
Aye.
Chairman Washut?
Aye.
We have a total of 7 ayes and 2 noes.
That bill is passed committee for a due pass, which takes us now. Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning. And we now go to House Bill 131. Representative Cragel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll run through it pretty quick. I bring to you Barry Cragel, House District 40, by the way. Sorry about that. I bring to you House Bill 131, Settlement Agreements for Minors, Parental Authorization. We talked about this a little bit on the floor during introduction. Really, this is a bit of an antiquated statute. It requires court approval of settlements regarding minors or conservatorships to be formed for minors on payment to them for any amount over $3,000. And all we're doing is changing that amount to make it more modern, up to $25,000. In other words, your parent can sign off for you as a child for settlement agreements on any amount $25,000 or less. It's that simple. I'm stand for any questions.
Do we need knowingly included in there anywhere?
We can find a way to put that in there, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like.
Just questions for Representative Cragel. All right. Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cragel, could we get just like a real life example of where this might be modernizing?
Representative Cragel.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Jennings. So car wreck. You get into a car wreck and your child is entitled to damages for the car wreck. Under current law, if those damages are more than $3,000, you have to go to the court, file an action, and get the court to sign off on the settlement agreement. This would just make it so if it's a minor car wreck, you're not going to have to go to the court to enter into a settlement agreement with the insurance company, most likely the person driving the other car. But if it's over $25,000, and that's sort of an arbitrary number, I think that's based on talking to people who do my job a lot more than I do back home, practicing law. That's kind of a number we can live with.
And how much would that cost an average family to resolve that car wreck if they had to hire an attorney and go to court to get that work done?
Mr. Chairman, it depends on how complicated the case is, but this is really trying to address the situation where you may not even have a lawyer. the insurance might come to you. The insurance company might say, hey, we know that we're at fault and here's where we want to pay your medical damages plus some amount on top of that. And lawyer may not get involved, but if they do, then it becomes rather costly to go to court. And you have to filing fees at court, et cetera. And so this just is trying to do two things. One, save families time, save family money. And of course, on top of that, it will, help our courts out a little bit, reduce the docket somewhat. So that's helpful as well.
Further questions? Seeing none. Anybody in the room wishing to testify on House Bill 131? Ms. Lance? We do gavel in at 9:30 this morning, so thank you. Knowingly, is that going to be necessary? No. Please introduce yourself. Tell us what you need.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Beth Lance. I'm here on behalf of Wyoming Lawyers and Advocates today and also the Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association. Both of these organizations stand in support of this bill. This is a good update to increase the value from the $5,000 to the $25,000. I think the $5,000 is certainly antiquated. I think a very minor settlement would be anything $25,000 or less. And it will, I think, also, as was stated by Representative Crago, save families money and time, certainly being able to avoid having to go through the process of potentially appointing conservators for the minors. I've actually served as a conservator for minors through settlements. And so then it costs them the filing for the paperwork, the time, the cost for my fees to be the conservator for the minors. And so it really can become costly and time consuming. And certainly I think that this $25,000 mark seems fair. I think, obviously that process is there for a reason, and for large settlement amounts, it would still exist. And so I think that this is actually a very good proposal here, and I think that our members that reviewed it were all supportive. So,
Thank you very much. Questions from Ms. Lance? Seeing none. Appreciate you being here this morning. Anyone else in the room wishing to testify? House Bill 131. Seeing none. Are there any on Zoom? Closed public comment. Committee, your preference? Moved by Crago, second by Harrelson or Manemic. Discussion? Amendment? Question being called. All those in favor? House Bill 131. Call the roll, please.
Representative Chestick?
Aye.
Representative Crago?
Aye.
Representative Harrelson?
Aye.
Representative Jennings? Representative Nemec?
Aye.
Representative Oakley?
She left a vote of aye.
Representative Provenza? Representative Rodriguez-Williams?
Aye.
And Chairman Waschit.
Aye.
Total of 9 ayes and 0 noes.
And folks, that concludes all the House bills that will come before House Judiciary. Next time we meet, we'll have Senate files. So thank you all very much.